everybody, and welcome to my garden. Today we're out here on a brisk November day, but it's not raining, so I'm going to take the opportunity to tackle some winter cleanup, and I'll take you along with me. What we're going to do today is talk about what do we do with our leaves, what do we do with our hostas, roses, hydrangeas, some of those key plants that are probably not looking so hot in your garden right now, but you wonder, what do I do? Do I prune it back? Do I wait till spring? We'll talk about all that today. The first area I'm going to tackle is probably the biggest area, and that is talking about leaves. So if you're fortunate enough to have beautiful trees like we do, we have these two massive maple trees that I'm standing underneath. If you're lucky enough to have those, you're also lucky enough to have this situation. So looking around, this is a fresh fall of leaves. Our kids were out here just a week and a half ago sweeping up, raking up most of these leaves, and here we are again with a fresh coat. So let's talk a little bit about what you want to do with these leaves. A lot of people just bag them up and send them off with their yard debris or take them down to the recycle center for yard waste, but there's so much more that you can do with them. A lot of the times in the winter, what I'll do is I will have them mulched up and put them over flower beds, put them over my vegetable beds, just to bed that area down for the winter and give it some extra nutrients. The easiest way to do that for us really is with a lawnmower. So if it hasn't been raining too much and it's fairly dry, we'll actually rake all the leaves out onto the lawn and we'll roll the lawnmower over it and then use that rough mulch. It's not as fine, but we'll use that rough mulch over different garden beds. I'll also use the dried leaves in the compost as I have room for it. Right now my compost is actually really full, but the last step is I just leave them. Honestly, I don't really get too anxious about leaves except when it comes to the lawn. So the situation that we have today is that it's been really wet, so it's not a prime time to rake them all onto the lawn and mow them up. So all I'm going to do today is actually just rake what's on the lawn off the lawn and pile them up into bark mulch areas or onto flower beds. And then as needed, I'll pull them out of the flower beds. But really, if that doesn't happen until spring, no big deal. So now that I have taken the leaves off the grass and I actually raked a path too, because I just couldn't handle it. I needed to see my paths. The next couple things I want to talk about are actually right here in this bed. And so we're going to talk about hostas, what to do with your hostas right now, what to do with your brunnera, your lungwort, and also some fuchsias, because they are kind of tricky and a lot of people cut them back this time of year, but we'll talk about why you don't want to do that. So let's start off with talking about hostas. So in front here, this is a hosta, this is a hosta, this is a hosta. You can see, and you will see in your own garden, that hostas winter over a little bit differently at different times. So this first hosta, you can tell, is done. And when you run your hands through it, the leaves come out. This is the time when I like to prune my hostas, is when I don't have to use my clippers. I just can pull my hand through here and pull out the leaves. That's really when you know that they're ready to be cut back. You can, however, go ahead and cut back hostas that are in this stage where they still have a little bit of color to them. They have some upright resistance here as well, but when I yank on them, the leaves don't quite come out. You can go ahead and prune them back if you just want to clean out your entire garden bed now. I leave these and I wait. Couple reasons. I want to make sure that the roots are getting enough energy to really winter over and then bring back the best show for next year. I also, this sounds kind of silly, just like to know where they are. When winter hits and the snow, if we have snow, we usually don't, but the snow is everywhere, or if I'm coming out in the spring and I'm thinking about, what do I want to move? Do I want to move some of these? Do I need to split them? Sometimes it's nice to know where they are. But honestly, it's just kind of about ease. So if you do want to go ahead and come in and cut out your hostas now, prune them down, just need some clippers and cut them at the base. Feel free to leave a little bit of green with them. Just another way to know where they are. But now is a time where you can come in and clip them out. So what I will do with the rest of these hostas is I am going to leave them. I'm more in the school of, if they're not ready to come out, I don't prune them back yet. They're not doing anything negative, so I'm going to leave the rest. Talking about, here's a bloom. Talking about fuchsias. So this is a hardy upright fuchsia, and I have 2 of them in this bed here. They don't look great. They look like they're done. They look like they're dormant, but I want to make sure that everyone here says don't cut them back. You want to cut these back when you start seeing some growth on them in the spring. And a lot of people will say, okay, February, March, I'm going to cut them back and let's go. I would wait. I think this year I didn't cut mine back until more like early May. So if you do have any fuchsias remaining in your garden, whether they're in baskets, pots, or in garden beds proper, just leave them. Leave them until you start seeing growth next year. Couple other plants I have in this garden bed: pulmonaria, also known as lungwort. Also looking great right now, so I'm not going to cut anything back here. I have different varieties of heuchera that also are giving some really good interest to this garden here, and I love how these leaves look. And then ferns. I don't cut any ferns back until the spring, until they start having new growth, but always be careful to not hit the new prawns that are coming out. And then finally, brunnera. This is one of my favorites. Kind of like this heuchera, just the interest in the leaves. This is a great garden plant for winter. So a couple varieties here. Again, on the hostas, if you want to cut them back now, please feel free to, but to give them a little bit more oomph for next year, might as well wait and you'll be good to go. All right, so for what number are we on? 4 or 5, I'm not sure. The next topic we're going to talk about is hydrangeas, and I have a varied lot of hydrangeas in here, so I'll visit a few different kinds, but what I want to talk about is, what do you do with them now? So the majority of hydrangeas you don't prune until the spring, and some people say if at all, but the majority of hydrangeas will bloom off of new wood. There are some that bloom on old wood, so your oak leaf hydrangeas, for example. And by old wood, I mean that it's going to bloom on growth that has been given some time to grow in. So you would prune it now, give it through the course of the winter, and then it would bloom on that growth in the spring. Blooming on new growth means you cut it off right after your last frost, and then that new growth that comes out, you'll get blooms on that new growth. The great thing about most hydrangeas is that they do bloom on that new growth, and so regardless of what you do to it, you'll get a great show. That's why they're so great. But what you want to do now is really leave the majority of them alone. So this is a large hydrangea I just put in the ground out after it being in a pot for many years, and I really am not going to touch it, other than I'm probably going to lop off a couple of these blooms. You don't have to. What I want to make sure is that I don't have too much weight on the top of some of these branches so that they break, because I'm really trying to establish this as a larger presence in this set of the garden. So I'm just making sure that if we do get a lot of rain, any snow, that these are not going to break over. So that might be the only maintenance that I do this winter. But if you do want to come in and take off any of these heads, just do it right at the top. Just do like a quick deadhead. Don't go any further than that. You really want to give it a lot of opportunity to establish down into the ground. And then if you want to cut it back to shape it in the spring, that's when you would do it. We're going to go this way because I want to show you a couple others. I have a set of Annabelle hydrangeas that I planted late 2 summers ago. So I have 6 going down the row here and then 6 going down another side. These did not bloom this year, and I think it's because I put them in so late the summer before, and then I did cut them back way too much. So what I'm going to do for next spring is I'm actually not going to touch these this winter, and then come spring I might just cut them back, prune them back a little bit to one of the first nodes of growth. So as you look down a hydrangea branch, you'll see new nodes of growth. Those are where the new branches, the new blooms are going to shoot out. If you want to control size, you would just cut down right above one of those nodes. Now, for these Annabelles, because their blooms get so large and so heavy, you want to make sure that you establish a base that has some great woody structure. So that has really, I guess, sturdier branches than most. A branch that's little like this, I won't care about as much, but some of these hardier branches, I just really want to protect this winter and make sure that they can be there for growth in the spring. So that's those hydrangeas. We're going to circle around here, come with me, and we're going to head over to the climbing hydrangea. So if you're lucky enough to be growing a climbing hydrangea in your garden, aren't they the best? And if you don't have one, I recommend you find one. So this climbing hydrangea has been either with my dad or with me for the last 7 years, and this is probably the happiest it has ever been in this current spot. We have it growing up a trellis and it's doing some great growth. One of the keys about climbing hydrangeas is that they don't do a full bloom until they have reached the top of their climb. So in terms of blooming, you don't want to say, take this new growth at the top and take it all the way down to the bottom. I am just going to leave this hydrangea as is. I'm doing a little bit of training to get more of the growth to come towards the trellis. So I might prune some of these wimpier branches down at the bottom. But for the most part, I really do not touch this hydrangea. And I haven't really touched it too much other than planting it in the ground for the last few years. And it's done really well. So if you have a climbing hydrangea, having trouble getting it to bloom, leave it alone. Let it climb, and I think it will reward you. One more stop on the hydrangea topic, and we're going to head down to the end of the garden. Let's go. So we're down at the end of our garden now, and I wanted to point out 2 more hydrangeas before we move on to the next topic. And these are the limelight hydrangeas that I planted earlier this spring, and they did amazing. So they'll probably take on 2 more feet next year is my hope, and I really want to promote that. So again, like we talked about before, I'm not going to do a massive prune on these in the spring, and even more in the winter. I'm just going to leave them alone. The only thing that I'm going to look at is, do I have any broken branches? Do I have anything that is at risk for breaking this winter with any sort of snow and wind? So going to leave these alone. Some people use these in dried flower arrangements. That is fantastic. I'm not that crafty, but if you want to, that's on you. So that's it for hydrangeas, and now I think we're going to talk about dahlias next. So I first want to point out how dirty I'm getting throughout this video. So I'm with you guys because I know we all experience the same thing. But where I'm standing used to be where we had a sea of dahlias. So there was a garden bench right here. It's actually still around. We just moved it out for some clean out. There was a row of dahlias here, and then behind me, where I have now planted even more hydrangeas, there was a row of dahlias back there. What I am doing is I realize that this section behind me just does not get enough sun for dahlias. So I am moving all of them next spring, which means I had to uproot the tubers from the ground. Now, typically being in a zone 8 in the Pacific Northwest, I usually don't remove my tubers from the ground, but because I'm going to move them next spring, I went ahead and did pull them up. So I want to talk about that a little bit. Because they were all here, what I did last week is I gently, after cutting off the dead, I gently dug underneath where I knew the roots were, and I pulled them up. What I then also did is I tagged them. So I tagged each of the root tubers to say what it was. So this one is actually a cafe au lait tuber. And I don't do anything fancy. I just used a popsicle stick and some twine. But the first thing you do is, after you pull them out of the ground, is you really don't do much, except if there's any that are squishy and obviously bad, you take those off. But these have been sitting in garbage bags, or I guess grocery bags, paper grocery bags, for about a week to dry out. What I'm going to do today, and I just wanted to show you guys an example of what one looks like. What I'm going to do today is take a little toothbrush that no one is going to ever use again and clean off more of the dirt and get them pretty well cleaned up. Check the tubers again, make sure I don't need to clip any off, and then I'm going to store them in a tub that has vermiculite and newspaper. Just something that's breathable, something that's going to keep them dry and stable over the winter. And then I will plant them again in the spring. I do want to show you that I will probably separate this tuber in the spring because it has a lot of great potential. So I have some eyes coming out, and that's where the plant growth comes from. So I'll probably be able to cut out a tuber here, another tuber here, and then carefully slice one out back here. So that's pretty exciting because I just put these tubers in the ground in the spring. So after 1 year, I'm getting some extra dahlias for next year, which is great. So handy process, give it a try. So excuse any noise from the periphery here. We have some great neighbors who are taking care of their lawns, and we are just going to roll with the punches. So you might hear a little bit of that noise, but I did want to talk a little bit more about planning for spring. So you went through the current spring, summer, and fall, and maybe if you're like me, you just stare out at your garden the entire time and think about, what could I do differently? What could I move? There's a hole there. That didn't quite get enough sun. What should I move? As you're looking at your garden, just get in the habit of making a list. Say, I think I want to move those Shasta daisies there. I think I want to move that rose there. And just keep that list going. So when you get to this time of year, you can go ahead and do those tasks. If you have a day that it's not raining, it's warm enough to get outside, the soil is still malleable, it hasn't frozen over yet, then this is a really great time to start moving some of your perennial shrubs around to put them in a better spot. So I want to talk about a couple things here when you're doing that. Below me is a rudbeckia that I have cut back. I am going to actually leave this here because it did wonderfully, and all I'm going to look at here is just to make sure I kind of clean it up. I might cut it back a little bit more and put a layer of mulch over it just to make sure that it is protected throughout the winter. What I am planning on moving, and this is something when you look at your garden, think about this, is I have don't look at these hydrangeas, but I have a hedge of Shasta daisies that are right below my feet here, that in the summer, the ones that come up right next to me here do great. The ones that come up closer to our dogwood tree don't. They look terrible. They don't get enough sun. And I have other plants that I could put in this part sun, part shade area that would do much better. So these are the things I'm thinking through. So I am going to be moving my Shasta daisies from the side of our dogwood tree actually out into the front of the dogwood tree. So they're going to be a bright white sunshiny hedge of Shasta daisies that is going to be the backdrop to our David Austin rose hedge that's right in front. So thinking about height, thinking about color blend, thinking about sun, it all just comes with experience and really just taking a look at what your plants are doing in your garden. So I'll be moving those forward, and then in the place where they were, I'll be planting these hydrangeas. Kind of a funny story, before we got married in our backyard, I went on a bit of a shopping spree at our local nursery just to bring in a lot of color, and I brought in a lot of hydrangeas to our world, so now I have to plant them. And these are going to be planted just to the side of our dogwood. They'll come up to about fence height, and I think it's just going to look fantastic. So moving my Shasta daisies, moving my roses. I also have a few other plants that just didn't do well where they were. I have some cannas that I'm going to lift up and move, and a few others. When you are moving your perennials for this year, don't forget to fertilize. Get a good starter fertilizer in the soil when you replant them. Water them in. Even though it's winter, you think, oh, they don't need the water. They really need that water right when they're planted, just to start engaging with the roots and the fertilizer and the soil beneath them. And then protect them. So cover them with a layer of mulch, whether that's leaves that you mulched up from your own yard, or just go get a bag of bark mulch to lay over, giving them some layer of protection. And then see what happens come spring. That's the best part. You can get a lot of your work done now and be rewarded come February, March, April, depending on when spring hits for you. So that's what I'm going to be starting to work on in my garden this week, is where do I want to move some perennials around, so then come after the winter I can focus on annuals. I moved over to our side garden to talk about roses, and I'm standing next to a rose that I am actively trying to rescue. I moved it from a not so prime spot to a much sunnier spot this summer. It was the worst time ever to move a rose, but if I didn't move it at that time, it was going to die on me, so I just went for it. But what I want to talk about is, what do we do with roses now? And I know a lot of people are inclined to say, I am going to prune them all back and it'll all be great. Well, you don't want to do that at this point. A lot of roses are not even dormant yet. So this one still has a bloom. I have a Floribunda rose in the front of our house that is very much in bloom, and we just don't want to touch them quite yet. So if you're inclined to move a rose, if you want to prune it way back, just hang tight. You can move roses around January. You'll want to prune them President's Day weekend around that time. But for now, all we want to do is just deadhead anything just to clean it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come to the rose. I'm just going to chop off the top. Same thing over here. And then if I see anything that might just look diseased or having some problems, I might cut that off. And that's really all that you want to do. The other thing that is recommended in some areas you don't have to do this, is dormant spray. So I will be applying dormant spray to all of my roses this year, just to make sure that they don't get any extra fungus, any extra disease as they go to sleep for the winter, and that they come back looking fresh. Earlier this spring, we had a very wet spring, and a lot of our roses, a lot of our phlox, a lot of our plants were infected with a fungus, and I was spraying them all the time. Really want to try and get ahead of that this year, so we'll be trialing out some dormant sprays, so we could talk about that in a later video, and I can tell you what my results were. But for now, just deadhead any tops of your roses, leave them be. If you want to move them, wait until about January. If you want to prune them down for height, I always say President's Day, take them down to about knee height. But right now, just a trim. So I don't want to leave without talking about the vegetable garden. And I know a lot of you that are watching are much further ahead in your vegetable garden skills than I am. I just want to remind everyone that this is the new part of gardening for me, is certainly on the vegetable garden side. So just putting your vegetable garden to bed, of course you want to pull out any crops that are done for the season. I just tested out some of these carrots, and they didn't turn out super well. We're going to call them hors d'oeuvre carrots, I think is what we'll do. So I'll finish pulling out the rest of my carrots. I have a couple other root crops to pull out, and then putting this bed to bed for the winter is really just going to consist of pulling out any weeds, and then adding a layer of mulched up leaves. Pulling out any weeds and then adding leaves is what I meant to say. Hoy. So taking the mulched up leaves that we ground up just with our lawnmower, and putting a layer of those leaves over this whole bed. And then the other thing that I am going to add in with it is mixing it in with a layer of blood meal. So this is essentially like making your own little insta compost for the soil that is going to remain in your bed over the winter. And so then when you come out to start seeding or plugging in starts for this next growing season, you have soil that is rich in nutrients and just ready to rock and roll. So I'll probably work on that over the next couple weeks. I have a couple crops I want to leave in a little bit longer, but then once all of those are out, I'm going to put a full layer of mulch, mix in with the blood meal over this bed, and then it'll be ready for next year. I decided not to grow garlic this year because we had so much extra last year and we just don't use it. So I'm really saving the space for some earlier crops come spring, which is going to be new for me, but I think I decided that this week. Yeah, I think I decided that. So we're going to go that direction and yeah, see if we miss the garlic. Well, I hope you guys found this video helpful and I hit on some areas that you were wondering about in your own garden. If you do have any other plants that you're just wondering, what do I do with them now? The internet is your friend. You can find almost anything on there, or call your local garden center and see what they suggest, especially for your area, because every area is a little bit different. I also did want to point out that if you do happen to be at your local garden center for whatever reason this type of year, that cyclamen are a really great plant to pick up. These will stay in bloom with color until early spring, and so it's a really good pop of color for your front porch, just for anything while everything is dead, doom and gloom. So cyclamen are a really great way to go. My local garden center had some in red, some in white, but just be careful when you go down to your local garden center. They all have their different requirements for COVID precautions. The one that we use here does such a great job, and picked these up just curbside today, so that was fantastic. If you are also looking to do some drastic changes with your landscape, this is the time of year to plant any trees or move any trees around. This is the prime time, and garden centers that specialize in trees are ready for you. So they'll probably have quite a bit of stock in terms of your maples, different juniper cedars that you can pick up today and also plant today. So with that, I'll say goodbye and good luck. Check out this fuchsia that is still green and showing buds. I doubt these will actually bloom, but holy moly, when the rest of fuchsia should look like this one's still doing its thing. Pretty cool. If you like what you see here today, be sure to click the like and subscribe button, and if you want to be notified of new episodes, click the bell.